certain is not a god, and yet you admit you don't know.
No, I'm certain that it doesn't help to postulate something very complicated at the outset, because what we've got is primeval simplicity, and from that stems everything.
He's saying, I don't know, but you don't know as well. But then if you don't know, how do you know that he doesn't know if you don't know? This doesn't make sense. It's just really, let's call it what it is. It's arrogant ignorance. Let's just call you what you are, Richard Dawkins.
My name is Armin Navabi. This is the Secular Jihadists. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started.
Someone who's negated this purpose, or any kind of purpose relating to a deity, or indeed the existence of any deity at all, is none other than Richard Dawkins, whose arguments have become so laboured and tired and repeated that now I have to say the whole Richard Dawkins effect, as well as the new atheist phenomena, has almost withered away to a state of non-existence.
He says the atheist movement is withering away.
The new atheist phenomena has almost withered away to a state of non-existence.
It's actually Islam that is withering away. Atheism and secularism is hitting Islam where it hurts the most. Between 2013 and 2019, the number of people in Arab countries who identify as not religious grew from 8% to 13%. And this number is actually higher among people under 30, whom 18% identify as not religious. Now get this. In Iran, 20% of Iranians don't believe in God. It gets even better. Around half of the people of Iran reported losing their religion. Around half of the population reported losing their religion. This is in a country of more than 87 million people. This is the largest mass exodus of people out of Islam, out of religion, in the history of mankind. The atheist movement and the secular movement is growing more than ever in the heart of Islam.
He has come and done an interview with Piers Morgan. Let's take a look at some segments of this interview which are pertinent to the God discussion and come and respond in kind.
What happened before, say you go for the Big Bang argument? What was there before? What does nothing look like?
Physicists are debating this. I'm not a physicist, but they're debating it. My point is that they don't know, and I don't know, and you don't know, and it doesn't help to postulate a God that did it.
But you're certain it's not a God, and yet you admit you don't know.
No, I'm certain that it doesn't help to postulate something very complicated at the outset, because what we've got is primeval simplicity, and from that stems everything.
You see, the first thing here, there's two aspects which I find quite interesting about this discourse here. First, we've heard this before from Richard Dawkins ad nauseum, okay? But the second is this presupposition here that whether or not there is a before the Big Bang, that has any bearing or relevance, or it's crucial to the idea of God existing or not. Because of course you can make arguments for God's existence which are timeless, in other words, are not restricted to time, which are not, for example, related to a before or an after. This is one aspect which is extremely important, because it may be assumed, especially for those followers of, or those people who have known, Thomas Aquinas' first way, or even Aristotle's argument for the prime mover, that if this done this and then before, and then you have to have a prime mover that kind of moves everything into existence, that this is the only argument for God's existence. You can have arguments for God's existence which don't relate to time in that sense. So that's a very important point. So just to summarize this point, arguments for God's existence don't require a time condition. You can make arguments for God's existence without time being a factor.
What are you responding to?
But the second is this presupposition here that whether or not there is a before the Big Bang, that has any bearing or relevance, or it's crucial to the idea of God existing or not. This is one aspect which is extremely important, because it may be assumed that this is the only argument for God's existence.
Where did Richard say that this is the only argument? Richard is just responding to a question by Piers Morgan.
We've heard this before from Richard Dawkins ad nauseum.
That's the question that was asked. Should he just not answer because this has been said before?
Whether or not there was even a beginning of the Big Bang, or whether or not the universe was eternal. And of course, we don't believe that the universe was eternal. The science, Richard Dawkins doesn't believe in it. Most, I would say, maybe scientists today don't believe in that. But despite that being the case, it doesn't mean that in order for us to make arguments for God's existence, now we have to have a before the universe existed scenario. This is the first thing, because of course, as he kind of alluded to, but he kind of restricted it to physics.
The current models do be suggesting that this universe has a beginning. What Muhammad doesn't seem to understand is that this universe is not necessarily everything. Generally, cosmos is used to describe the entirety of everything that exists, including multiple universes if they exist. The word universe is what we use to refer to a specific space, time, matter, and energy. So cosmos includes this universe and potentially other universes. It still might be true that our universe is eternal. We haven't ruled out the possibility of our universe going through cycles of expansion and contraction. And like I said, it also might be part of an eternal multiverse. Also, it might be eternal in one direction. It might have a beginning and then go on forever.
It's not the case, Richard Dawkins mentioned, that this is an argument for physicists. Actually, philosophers have been discussing this as well. Philosophers and physicists have been discussing different theories of time.
What did he say that was wrong? He didn't say they are the only ones discussing the topic.
If you're an agnostic, which of course you call yourself an atheist. I mean, Richard Dawkins calls himself an atheist. He's been categorized as a strident atheist, someone who flagrantly talks about the non-existence of God, but in reality he's an agnostic. So the most, flagrant atheist, strident atheist, the symbol of atheism, especially in the UK and the West, is actually an agnostic.
Oh my Iblis, not this again. After all this debating and studying atheism and arguments for God, Muhammad doesn't understand the simple concept that atheism and agnosticism are not mutually exclusive. Atheism is about not having belief. Agnosticism is about not having certainty. So it's completely possible for someone to be atheist and agnostic at the same time. How do you not know this? You claim to be such a strong force against atheism and you don't even understand the basics.
Did you notice that Richard Dawkins, when he was discussing with Piers Morgan, he says, I don't know and you don't know. How do you know that he doesn't know if you don't know? I mean, this doesn't make sense to me. And he does this all the time. If you're an ignorant person, if you're ignorant of something, then how do you know that someone else's ignorance is identical to your ignorance if you're ignorant? It's this kind of having your cake and eating it both, having your epistemological cake and eating it as well at the same time. How can you have both? If you're ignorant, then don't be an arrogant, ignorant person. This is actually interesting. He's saying, I don't know, but you don't know as well. But then if you don't know, how do you know that he doesn't know if you don't know? This doesn't make sense. It's just really, let's call it what it is. It's arrogant ignorance. Let's just call you what you are, Richard Dawkins. You're an arrogant man because you're postulating what other people do or do not know, but also you're an ignorant man because agnosticism is basically ignorance. That's all it is. When you're saying I don't know, you're saying I am ignorant. So you're combining the worst of the two vices together. You can't say you don't know and I don't know and you don't know, or you don't know and I don't know, because if you don't know what other people know. So don't try and combine arrogance and ignorance in this manner, because you'll make a comical fool out of yourself.
Dawkins is acknowledging that there are many things that we don't know. Admitting ignorance is not arrogant, it's actually the opposite. How dishonest do you have to be to portray somebody acknowledging the limits of our knowledge as arrogance? It's actually a demonstration of humility. Also, Dawkins is not claiming to know what Piers Morgan specifically doesn't know. He's referring to what we all don't know. These are the current limits of our human understanding. Unless Piers Morgan is a secret genius scientist who has somehow cracked the mystery of the origins of our universe, and for some reason he's just keeping it to himself. Pay attention to how he uses Dawkins' ignorance as an insult.
It's just really, let's call it what it is. It's arrogant ignorance. Let's just call you what you are, Richard Dawkins. You're an arrogant man because you're postulating what other people do or do not know, but also you're an ignorant man because agnosticism is basically ignorance. That's all it is. When you're saying I don't know, you're saying I am ignorant.
This is such a religious mindset, to consider admitting lack of knowledge as a vice. This level of humility among scientists is actually what made us wiser. The real vice is the religious one, is to pretend that we know things that we don't actually know. By being honest by the things that we don't know, we open ourselves to opportunities of growth and discovery, rather than being satisfied with the answers that we think we already have. It takes courage to admit ignorance. But it's a necessary step towards genuine knowledge and understanding.
Let's take a look at the second. Let's take a look at the second video.
We are a tiny, tiny dot in the universe. Right?
Exactly. We are tiny.
So you don't know what else is out there, really, other than what scientists have already established.
No, I think it's highly likely that there are other beings out there which are much cleverer than we are. Superhuman, not supernatural, but superhuman. And I would love to meet them.
Okay, you see, I mean, if you watch this carefully, I thought this was actually a very good strategy from Richard Dawkins. And this is from someone who's written a book about him and the New Atheists. I've written a book called The Scientific Delusions of the New Atheists, which is free of charge. You can get it from PDF from the Sapiens Institute. So someone who's read all of his works, practically. But and I've seen his strategy in his debates. I have seen and known this is a good strategy from Richard Dawkins. I have to give him credit. Because Piers Morgan asked him a question which related, although not explicitly, to the fine-tuning of the universe. Richard Dawkins, as well as Christopher Hitchens and many of the new atheists, are fully aware of the difficulty of the task of responding to this argument. It's on the record. In fact, Richard Dawkins himself in the book The God Delusion refers to it as the Goldilocks zone. He refers to it that himself. He agrees to the fine-tuning. He can't deny it. And then he has something called the anthropic principle, and then it's different. You got the weak and the strong. He doesn't go into this. Instead, he just diverts the entire discussion. I find it quite intelligent strategically. Piers Morgan didn't follow this because obviously he's not in tune with these kind of things. He's a journalist. You can't hold him to account too much. Although he asked the first question, which was, I think, a good question.
Oh yeah, Mohammed, they're shaking in their boots. It's not like this hasn't been answered over and over and over again by many atheists, including Richard Dawkins in the same book that you're citing. Again, Mohammed Hijab, who claims to be so knowledgeable about these topics, doesn't seem to be aware of all these responses. I think a certain someone might need some fine-tuning of his knowledge on this subject.
What is the probability, he's asking, right? But let me rephrase the question in a way which maybe the viewers will understand. Okay. Number one, whether or not they're humans or superhumans, because he started talking about superhumans, Richard Dawkins. Whether or not there's humans or superhumans or life, or animal life or human life, whatever life form there is, my question is as follows. You have a universe, correct? No one's going to say no. Yes, you have a universe. Yes? Okay, yeah, we have a universe. Is he going to deny? Is Richard Dawkins going to deny? No, he's not. Is Christopher, is he going to deny? No. We have a universe. Yes. We have life in the universe. Yes. Whether it's human life or superhuman life or animal life. Okay, fine. There are laws in the universe which are consistent, which allow continually for life to exist in the universe. Say that again. Just say it again. There are laws in the universe which consistently allow for human or any kind of life to exist in the universe. Is that a fact? Yes, it is a fact. Whether you want to have a nominalist or a conceptualist view of laws, I'm not talking about a substance, but the conditions of the universe are such that it allows, yes, it allows the continued existence for some time of or for some period of time of what? Of life. What is the explanation of this? That's my question, Richard Dawkins. He's going to say, I don't know, and you don't know, and we don't know. No, I'm going to say that's not an answer. That is you purporting that I don't know anything. The question is, what is the best explanation for this? What is the best explanation for the fact that the conditions of the universe continually allow life to exist within it?
Many explanations have already been offered. You should know this, Mohammed Hijab. This is supposed to be what you do. Among the many responses that has been provided as an explanation for why the universe seems to be fine-tuned, it's because we are observing it from a perspective of existing life. If it was any way else, it would seem fine-tuned from that perspective. Here, let me make this simple. Imagine a room with countless doors. Behind each door, there's a different universe. You can only open the door if the universe behind that door supports life. You open a door and you find that the universe in there is a life-sustaining universe. Would you be surprised? Was this universe fine-tuned for life? Or are you observing this universe because you could only observe a universe that sustains life? Last time I checked, living is a requirement for observing. There's also the multiverse explanation. If our universe is one of many universes, with each one of them having their own physical laws and constants, then of course you're going to have universes that seem fine-tuned for life. In fact, you're going to have universes that seem fine-tuned for anything that you could imagine.
What's the best explanation for that? That's all the question I'm asking. Think about it for a second. I'm not going to give you the answer. You're clever enough to think about it. Think about it. Is the best explanation that it came from nothing, which Piers Morgan correctly identified as something really unintelligible? Nothingness doesn't really, there's no evidence that it exists in the real world in the first place. The absence of something, okay? Where did it come from? Randomness? We don't believe in randomness. Randomness is just your ignorance. You don't understand something, you call it random. That's what randomness is.
You should know these fallacies. This is a false dichotomy. You're presenting a false dichotomy between it came from nothing and randomness as the only possible explanations. That's a fallacy. There are other naturalistic explanations.
So where did it come from? Where did these conditions, or how are these conditions so that they allow for the continued existence of life in the universe? That's all the question I have. And if you're saying that, well, the best explanation is X, Y, and Z, let's hear it. Let's hear whatever explanation you have. What we're proposing is that laws come from a lawmaker, an intelligent one at that, one with knowledge, one with the ability to change the situation. Because had that not been the case, the situation would not have been changed. It's a fine, simple answer to a very simple question.
This is another very common logical fallacy that anybody who debates atheists all the time should be aware of. Muhammad is shifting the burden of proof. If you don't have enough evidence for your claim, you can't then shift the burden of proof to the other side, asking them to prove that you are wrong. You are making the claim. You are the one who has to provide the explanation. It's like accusing your partner of cheating because she can't prove that she hasn't been cheating. If you make the accusation, you're the one who has to prove that you're right. In this case, Muhammad is asking atheists to provide an explanation for the existence of the conditions that allow life in our universe, pretending that a lack of explanation means that we have no choice but to accept the Islamic explanation. But even if we had no explanation, that doesn't make your explanation correct, Muhammad. Muhammad is essentially claiming that if we can't disprove his claim, that would mean that his claim is true. But you are making the claim. You are the one who has to prove it. This is some really basic stuff, guys.
And we don't have time to watch the video, but I will mention something interesting. He, in the same interview, he was mentioning, you know, in the sick bed, if you were dead or if you were going to die, and you were being... Richard Dawkins fascinatingly admitted, okay, he fascinatingly admitted that it would be much harder for him than for a religious person. And that's interesting. I'm not saying therefore God exists. No one's saying therefore God exists, but existentially this is interesting. Why would someone choose this way of life when, number one, it doesn't answer for... It has no explanatory scope. Atheism doesn't explain the complexity of the universe, the fact that the conditions of the universe allow life to exist within it continually, nor does it explain the purpose of life. Atheism is a vacuous, nonsense claim that doesn't explain anything.
Okay, back to the basics we go. Atheism is not supposed to have explanatory power. You would know this if you understood what atheism is. Atheism is simply a lack of belief in God. It doesn't have the burden of explaining anything. It doesn't have the burden of explaining the complexity of the universe. It's just a yes or no answer to the question of belief in God. Just because atheism does not have the burden of explaining anything, that doesn't mean religion is a good explanation. We have other methods that do a better job than religion with explanatory power. It's called science, bitch.
He fascinatingly admitted that it would be much harder for him than for a religious person. And that's interesting. Why would someone choose this way of life?
Muhammad, facts don't care about your feelings. The difficulty of accepting an answer has no bearing on whether or not it's true. It's our responsibility to seek out and accept truth, regardless of how difficult it might be.
Richard Dawkins himself, although he calls himself an atheist, and people call him that, is not actually an atheist. He's an agnostic, which means really he's an ignorant person. So why are people so fascinated, and had been so fascinated in this country, for example, of following an ignoramus with his own self-admission? I say that it's best for us not to follow this tract and in fact to follow something else, the Quran, which is the book we were talking in the beginning about, the Quran.
How about instead of following a person or a book, we evaluate each idea on its own merits?
Ask the following question. أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَنَّمَا خَلَقَنَاكُمْ عَبَثًا وَأَنَّكُمْ إِلَيْنَا لَا تُرْجَعُونَ? This is a question. Do you believe that you were created aimlessly and that you will not be returned to us? Is that really your presupposition? Do you believe that? أَحَسِبَ الْإِنسَانَ أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى? Does the individual believe that he's going to be left aimless? Think about those questions. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
My name is Armin Navabi. This has been the Secular Jihadists. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.